Uh, we've been working for the last now 9 weeks. This is the ninth week on an essay by Thomas Arzt from this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. And we're working today with volume 1 of the series. And Thomas Arzt has written a truly profound essay on um, on the state of our time. And so if you have the ability to do so, I urge you to go back and listen to all the sessions that we've done before, because we've basically been unpacking Dr. Arst's essay, which is quite a long one, because it has layers upon layers upon layers of information for us. And if you're in a place where you can look at YouTube, in the description of this session, I will be putting 2 links to the 2 videos on which I read this essay right through. So you can go back and just listen to the whole essay right through. It takes about an hour and 15 minutes to listen to that. But the purpose of this session is to go through the essay line by line and to understand what he was saying at a very deep level. When I read this essay the first time, I was just decapitated. It had so much in it that I had to think about it for weeks. And Thomas Arzt became my friend because I wrote to him and told him what a wonderful essay it was. And then he and I had an interaction that went over 3 years. And I was to meet him, and Nick Chen was going to meet him this past April, but we had to cancel because of coronavirus. And unfortunately, Dr. Arzt died shortly after that on Easter Sunday, April the 12th of this year, in 2020. He died, and I suspect it was because of the coronavirus. It was very early in the pandemic. And so anyway, so in part, reading his essay is my memoriam to him and to his brilliance. And so last week I was reading a section, which I'll just read through quickly, and then I'll start going line by line. But I was reading a section called The Coming Eon, and it's only 1 paragraph. So, and Dr. Arzt, of course, in this series, all the writers, and there are now 70 of them in 4 volumes, have unpacked 70 different takes on what the Red Book was about. So here's what we said at the end of last week's session. The Coming Eon. Jung strikes a prophetic tone in his Red Book. However, despite being certain that it is an important work of revelatory character, eventually to gain a broader audience for its visionary elements, he does not see himself as a prophet. Quote, I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children, unquote. Upon further review, Jung's first picture at the beginning of the chapter, The Way of What Is to Come, does hint at his notion of thinking in astronomic and astrological terms. His narrative of the individuation process directly corresponds to the insight that the Christian age, the Piscean age, is coming to an end, and that mankind is standing at the doorstep of a new age, the Aquarian age. Humanity is experiencing birth pains since a new image of God is unfolded. And I do have that image at the beginning of the Red Book, so I will share that with you. So first of all, we need to talk about the word insight, because it means quite a bit more uh, than um, than just an idea or a way of thinking about something. And in this case, insight is looking actually at the inner part of the human being. Okay, here's the picture. Let me pull it up. So it means looking at your unconscious. Um, here's the image. Okay, so this is the very first image in the Red Book. And what you see here across the top is indications for major planets across in here. And this is the set point in the in astrology, the sun, where the sun is. And you can see the moon and the other planets. So this represents astrology. And then, so that's sort of the sky above. But what we're talking about here is the sky above in the psyche, in the unconscious. We're not talking about all those rocks out in space that whirl around the sun like the Earth does. We're talking about something that's going on in the psyche. And that's, in my opinion, and based on a lot of study of Jungian psychology, that's what Dr. Jung was talking about. And I'll speak about that in the context of Chinese astrology here in a moment. But you see a number of images or symbols that represent his work. For example, the snake going up is our tendency, or the tendency of the unconscious to become conscious. In other words, we have the fire, the passion of the human species, which is trying to understand what's going on. And what Dr. Jung was always about was the unconscious is always trying to become conscious. And so that's what dreams and visions are all about. And so this snake represents the very slow process over millions of years, billions of years really, of life coming up out of material things and reaching the point where we can think and reflect upon ourselves. So here this snake is wearing a crown indicating the fact that we've reached consciousness. And so then this, of course, is just the normal world that we see. And then the water represents the unconscious, and the creepy crawly things we have down under the sea that have pushed forward, pushed up into consciousness. And so, as we know, life depends upon water. And so life originated in water also. And so the idea is that something happened billions of years ago, which caused matter to begin to live. And all of us are the result of that process over billions of years. And all of our ancestors, going back to single-celled organisms, have done two things successfully. They survived until they reproduced. They survived until they reproduced. And so, and that's true of every one of our ancestors going back millions of generations and resulting in us. And we are in this eternal moment. And so together we're deciding to spend our moment with one another talking about consciousness, trying to make us ourselves more conscious. And I was reading an article by Lorenz Vanderpost this week in a book about the Tarot called Tarot, the Archetypal Journey, the Jungian Path from Darkness to Light by Sally Nichols. Now, in this book, Lorenz Vanderpost has an introduction in which he's talking about the fact that many people mistake Dr. Jung's insight and his brilliance because they focus on the collective unconscious. And of course, he did discover the collective unconscious, but that isn't what his work was really about. His work was really about consciousness and about awareness. And so the thing that Mr. Vanderpost brought to my attention is that Dr. Jung didn't actually use the word consciousness. Nicole, you're here.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, okay, we're back online. I don't know what's happening. We've been having periodic internet interruptions, and I'll do my best to continue. But actually, you haven't missed anything because I was just recapping last week. And so I was making a comment. This is only Skip talking, so I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm not an expert on astrology. But what I've been talking about in astrology is, and it's related to Chinese astrology, is that most of us in the West have been to a Chinese restaurant, and we've had these placemats where it will give us the Chinese zodiac. And by year, we can figure out which of those zodiac figures applies to us. It turns out I'm a dog ear person. And when you read that description of what a dog ear person is, I find that it describes me bang on. And most people, I think, do think that it describes them quite well. And so, how can that be? And the answer has to do with something that's going on in the collective unconscious, which is that, as Jung said, as above, so below. This is what the alchemists have been saying for thousands of years. And so what this means is that with respect to the planets, of course, the movement of the actual planets in the sky have very little meaning to us. However, there's those same constellations exist in our unconscious. Why? Because over thousands of years, men and women have looked at the sky, and they've said, well, this means this. And people have reached a consensus about all these things. And so astrology everywhere in the world, not only in the West, but also in China, has been a matter of discussion across societies for thousands of years. And what we know about anything is that if it proves to be true, we tend to remember it. But if it doesn't, if things don't prove to be true, we tend to forget it. And this was very frustrating. Excuse me just a minute. This was very frustrating to scientists like Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, who about 40 years ago, he did a television series called Cosmos. It was a wonderful series in which he explained how the planets work in many ways from an astronomical point of view. But he was hugely frustrated and upset because there were over 3,000 newspapers in the world that were carrying a daily astrology column, and no newspapers in the world that were carrying a daily astronomy program and or column. And so in retrospect, I think that his frustration is quite funny because he simply did not understand the unconscious at all. Um, and people who are reliant upon the scientific method tend to not understand the psyche because they can't put their finger on it. But nonetheless, the psyche is real, as we all know. And it's time we started to understand how it works. And, you can, in the physical world, you can say, oh, well, this neuron is firing when he's doing XYZ type action and so on. But they can't feature the fact that the things that are actually going on in your psyche. For example, if you're looking at my image right now and you're seeing this building behind me and the water and the trees and all those things, in addition to my purple plaid shirt here and many other factors. There's so much information in this one picture. How could that possibly be? We cannot understand by looking at an electroencephalogram or something like that what it is that's happening in the brain, in the mind, to present you with that picture. And the reason is that a lot of that is happening in the psyche. Yes, there are stimuli in terms of physically seeing something, and there are rods and cones and all that, but your psyche has to put those sensed data points together in such a way that you can actually see this picture, make sense of it, and understand that we're talking with people across the world, where we have people in an unnamed country plus Singapore and Australia live online on this Zoom conference. And, none of us understand that or how that could be and how it works, but nonetheless, it does work. And our minds can decode that information and present us with a picture of sound and visual and so on. And so it's the same with astrology. What happened, and this is my opinion only, I'm not a professional astrologer, but what happened is the people were talking about the stars for at least thousands of years, probably tens of thousands of years. And they created a universe within the psyche, which once you have consensus about something, like a dog-ear person means these characteristics. Well, it turns out that if everybody agrees that somebody who's born in a dog ear is going to have these characteristics, then pretty soon it becomes true. And by pretty soon, I mean in 2,000 or 3,000 years, people just make it so. And so the same is true in Western astrology, where we've been talking about the movement of the planets for thousands of years. And we've been saying this means this means that. It's no different than saying this letter A, that physical symbol A means okay. We all agree that that's what it means, and therefore it does. And the same in Chinese writing, where you draw a pictograph to create a Chinese word, and over time, that's what you see. And so I had the experience when I was studying Chinese over 50 years ago of reading a Chinese text in Zhongguozi and in Chinese characters, and actually seeing pictures come to mind in the same way that they come to mind if I'm reading Roman letters, and in fact, maybe more vividly. And so all these things have references to tiny little things in our psyche, and we don't know what exactly. I mean, Dr. Jung talked at a very gross level about complexes. So in the Red Book, he was having visions of people coming to him. Philemon and Elijah and Salome physically visited him in the Red Book, and those were active imaginations, participatory imagination, where he could actually ask them questions and have them come back to us, to him, and answer them. And he could write down the answers, and then he could ask another question. And he did this for a 5-year period. And that is the essence of what we have in the Red Book. But that's at a fairly gross level, and so that's the way our psyche communicates with us at a gross level, where a certain complex of us comes together, and we call that in Jungian psychology the self. So that self isn't physically a man, and it certainly isn't physically a man who has wings, as is the case with Philemon in the Red Book. But nonetheless, that's what Dr. Jung was seeing. And so that man with wings that he was seeing from in his unconscious, where he was having these conversations, is actually the self speaking. And the self normally does not manifest, but as the Bhagavad Gita says, and I'll just quote to you, I happen to have this right handy. Okay, so I want to give you the image from the Red Book that I'm talking about. And this is an image that Dr. Jung was seeing in his mind. Let's see here, where is it? Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you this image. So here is Philemon, and this is what he was seeing in his mind. And he was seeing this snake, and understand that he's seeing this as a very large man, because he's standing on the roof of something that has a domed ceiling. And so this is what he was seeing in his mind. And next to it, he has a quote from the Bhagavad Gita. And it's, I thought that was just, and I think most Jungians thought that was just an interesting sidelight, that he had put the Bhagavad Gita there at that point in the Red Book. And what does that mean? Why did he put it there? Well, here's what it says. It says, indeed, whenever there is decay of righteousness and growth of unrighteousness, I incarnate myself. O descendant of Bharata, I reincarnate across the ages in order to give protection to the righteous and to destroy the unrighteous for the reinstatement of righteousness. So the fact that he, and it translates a little differently depending on who you read. I can read another version of it here. Reading from another book, it says, although I am unborn and imperishable, son of Bharata, whenever there is a decline in Dharma and the absence of Dharma increases, I create myself. I come into being from age to age with the purpose of fixing Dharma as a refuge for those who do good and as a doom for those who do evil. And so it's a little different way of translating it, but the point is that this part of the psyche comes forward and manifests itself in some way. And in Dr. Jung's psyche, this came forward as Philemon. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is Vishnu who is manifested in the conversation with Arjuna as Krishna. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna and Krishna are having this conversation before a battle in the chariot, which represents Arjuna's life, and his chariot driver is the self, is Krishna, is Vishnu, if you will. And Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. And so in that sense, what he's saying is that when things get really, really unrighteous, then someone comes forth, manifests in physical form. And those types of people are Jesus Christ and Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. And there have been a few others throughout history who manifest and create righteousness. And everybody turns to them and says, yes, they're speaking what God speaks. And so in astrology, then we have things that, so astrology is so developed over so many thousands of years that, and there have been so many astrologers that have stated opinions about it, that it simply becomes true. And there's a very famous story of crabs in the inland sea of Japan. There's a story that goes back to Hiroshima and a shrine that's out in the sea in Hiroshima. And after a certain big battle, the samurai that lost had to commit suicide. And so there was a legend in the Sea of Japan among the fishermen that the souls of those samurai who had committed suicide at the loss of the battle had gone into the crabs. And so what would happen is the fishermen would fish up crabs and they would look at the belly of the crab. And if they saw on the belly of the crab what looked like the image of the head of a samurai, they would throw it back in the sea. They wouldn't eat that crab. But if the crab didn't have a belly that looked like a samurai, they would throw it in the boat. And so over many hundreds of years, let's say 1,500 years, the fishermen had done this over and over and over again, so that finally it became true that the belly of all crabs look like samurai by evolution. The crabs that looked like they contained the soul of a samurai would be saved, but those that didn't look that way would be eaten. And so over 1,500 years, the bellies of all these crabs now look like samurai. And so that's human beings selecting. And so the astrology works in a similar fashion, where if somebody says, well, this means this, if you were born in this year after this kind of year, then, you're going to have this kind of personality, and it proves to be true. And it becomes more and more true as time goes on, until nowadays you can sit down at a Chinese restaurant and read about your year, your dog year, or your year of the snake, or your year of the pig, and you'll know exactly what you'll read something and you say, yep, that's me, because it has proven true over thousands of years, and more true, just like the crabs became more and more looking like samurai. And so when we think of Dr. Jung and astrology, he's talking about the astrology of the planets as they exist in our psyche. And in my insight, let's say, and I have no reason to believe this, I've never read it anywhere, and so if it sounds true, it must be true. But if it doesn't sound true, then I'm an idiot. But the reason astrology works is basically because of that. By consensus over thousands of years, astrologers have said that when Saturn and Pluto and Uranus conjoin, then it means this. And sure enough, we get conjunctions like that. And we're going through one of those right now. And astrologers that I know say that the lineup of the planets in astrology now hasn't existed since the time of Martin Luther, since the time of great upheaval, when the Catholic Church was overthrown in part by Martin Luther, and there was a great schism, and half of Christianity went off into Protestantism and half stayed in Catholicism. And we haven't had a lineup of the planets like that since that time, since around between 1515 and 1520, so 500 years. And, it doesn't mean that the physical planets whirling around in space had any influence at all. Scientists will diss that all day long, and in my opinion, they're right to do that. But in the psyche, because we've created these ideas in the psyche, we've basically created a solar system in the psyche of man over thousands of years, and the solar system that's in the psyche of man does work that way. It in fact does work that way. And so that's why it behooves us to pay attention to astrology. And so this is why Jung is observing astrology within his psychology. Okay, now, so that was a 45-minute homily on where we ended last week. I hope that was useful. Let's see here. I just want to see how we're doing on YouTube. I guess we do have some audience on YouTube, and I apologize for my earlier connectivity problems. Um, so I'm going to read on now, and I'm on page 30 of Dr. Thomas Arst's first essay in this 4-volume series called The Way of What Is to Come, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. So he says, the Red Book is highly complex and indeed an enormous volume, and anything but light reading. It does not offer itself for a quick skim, but rather it grows in substance for the persistent, as with homeopathic doses and small bites. Although, okay, so what he's saying here is that if one reads the Red Book and starts to understand in depth what Dr. Jung was talking about, then it becomes more and more apparent to you. So it relates back to this idea of what Dr. Jung meant by consciousness, which means awareness, okay, to as Lawrence Vanderpost said. Although amenable to manifold perspectives and interpretations, it already is certain that the Red Book is going to call for a new view of Jung's life and oeuvre. So Dr. Arzt, at this point of the project, he took this project on in 2015 with Dr. Mary Stein, who we had a session with about 3 weeks ago, and I urge you to take a look at his session. But the point is that at the time he was writing this essay, he was saying that it called for a new view of Jung's life, and what ended up manifesting out of this series, out of this 4-volume series, this is volume 1, but they're now 4 volumes, is that there have been 70 different views of the Red Book and what it means, including the second one, the second essay, which is by a very famous astrologer named Liz Green. And so the way I've put it is that the Red Book represents kind of an uncut diamond that Dr. Jung was amplifying in various ways through his life's work, which now is in 20 volumes, but I'm told it's going to be reissued in at least 26 volumes, and that doesn't even count the letters and so on. And the visions seminars and so on. But in the collected works, this is the basis upon which Dr. Jung was working. He said it was his prima materia, his base material. And so what Dr. Arzt has demonstrated by this project, and Dr. Stein now has been carrying on, is that 70 different Jungian analysts could look back at the Red Book and see it in 70 different ways. So what I say is it was an uncut diamond, and each one of these Jungian analysts has shown another facet of this diamond. And so it's becoming richer and richer and richer as these commentaries continue. So not only will there be not one new view of this life's work, but there will be many, many over many years. And it's similar in its import to something like the Bhagavad Gita, which is translated into, I think, 75 different languages and has been published over 1,300 times. In different translations. And so we're getting the same sort of thing emerging from the Red Book now. Okay, so going on. Furthermore, one can confidently presume that Jung's rank in the intellectual history of the 20th century must be reevaluated, since his searching for his own myth comes at an epical turning point in human history and the history of human consciousness. So what people have misunderstood Dr. Jung and have misunderstood psychology itself because of a lot of issues that came up during the 20th century. Dr. Jung's work was sort of in a backwater in Switzerland for decades, literally decades. And the problem was that people who were rationalists thought that psychology was something that they could work out by statistics, except that statistics don't tell us anything about psychology. They tell us something about numbers, but the statistics don't tell us how the psyche works. Statistics, and this is kind of the problem of modern psychiatry and psychology, because based on this statistical approach is how psychology is addressed these days. So if you come in with this depression, a doctor will think, okay, well, 90% of the time, if I give, Valium or Darvon or some other pill, this person who's depressed will feel better. And so they come in, they get a 10-minute visit. Yeah, I'm depressed. Here's a pill. And so what they've done is the pharmaceutical industry has hooked us on opioids, but we haven't really gotten better. And the point about Dr. Jung's work was that if you could become aware, conscious of what was going on in your psyche, actually going on in your psyche, then you could achieve a solution, the talking cure, so to speak, as Dr. Freud also spoke of the talking cure. So if you could have a conversation with any mental health professional, or it happens in normal conversations. So, when you go out with a girlfriend and have tea together, or you go out with a man friend and have coffee at the coffee shop, and people do this all over the world, and they're talking. Human beings are talking with one another all the time in social gatherings of various kinds. What they're doing is actually a low resolution version of psychotherapy. And what you can, if you watch yourself when you do those conversations, you'll realize that you feel better afterward. Yeah, my girlfriend help me see my problem with my husband in a different way, let's suppose, or vice versa, or the men are solving the problems of the world with one another at the coffee shop. Not that they're actually doing it, but they're at least seeing that they're not alone in their belief that this politician is a ridiculous person, or that politician is a ridiculous person, whatever it is, or the boss is always a bad person, let's say. That's archetypally true. The boss is always wrong, right? And so, but if you and your girlfriend agree that the boss is always wrong, then at least you feel better about yourself, whether or not he's wrong. And so that's sort of very low resolution psychotherapy. What a tarot reading does at sort of a mid-level is it jogs the unconscious, an astrology reading too, or any form of divination. What it does is it jogs the unconscious through what's called in neurolinguistic programming anchors. It will cause you to think about something that needs adjustment in your psyche. So if in a tarot reading I get the Empress card, and from that Empress card I say something about your mother in my reading, because it's the Empress card which represents mother, then if you're actually having a problem with your mother, it will resonate with you. That word will anchor with you, and you, even though you were unconscious of what that issue was, it comes to the fore, and therefore you can reflect upon it yourself. And so that's what divination techniques will help you with, whether it's the I Ching or reading tea leaves or the tarot or whatever it happens to be, whatever method you use. And so then a deeper level of psychotherapy is when you go to a mental health professional, and I'm not one of those, but what will happen is the mental health professional presumably knows much more about what goes on in all human psyches, and therefore can directly guide the conversation over certain issues that we all need to become aware of and understand in a mature way. And so they will have conversations with you about your dreams or visions, and that's your psyche saying, I'm hurting here, something is wrong. And if a mental health professional would be able to say that and understand better what is wrong, or works with you to figure out what is going on, and that's that's the way the talking cure works. And so let's see. Okay, so the reason that this is a turning point in human history, it also works in religion, and the reason that religions have survived and worked together for centuries, and they all more or less do the same sorts of things. I'll just give you a quote that relates to that. Just a moment. Okay, so I'll give you a share screen on this quote so that you understand where Dr. Jung was coming from. He says theologians and psychologists are in the same business. That heading was put by me, but here's his quote. And also what's in square brackets here is my amplification of what he said. But here's what he said. For thousands of years, the mind of man was worried about the sick soul, perhaps even earlier than it did about the sick body. The propitiation of gods, the perils of the soul, and its salvation, these are not yesterday's problems. Religions are naturally evolved. Religions are naturally evolved psychotherapeutic systems in the truest sense of the word and in the grandest scale. They express the whole range of the psychic problem in mighty images. They are the avowal and recognition of the soul, and at the same time, the revelation of the soul's nature. And that's from paragraph 367 of volume 10 of the collected works. And so the significance of what this says is that religions were always about psychotherapy. And so, just as I was describing how having a cup of tea with a girlfriend in a morning or sitting around at a coffee shop talking with one another, that can help you at a low resolution level. So it is with religion. And so I started to realize that when I went to church on Sunday, afterward, I would feel better. I didn't know why, but and I always had the same problem as a typical um, rational male of the mid 20th century had, which is, um, you know, we can see back to the Big Bang. Where is God? Prove to me that there's God. Uh, I would have that same question in my own mind, and what to do about it, because religion is telling you one thing, and yet you can't prove it. You can't physically prove it. Well, the reason is because it's not talking about physically proving anything. It's talking about something that's going on in your psyche, and most theologians themselves don't understand that point. And that's why Jung's work is revolutionary um, and scary for many people. That's why Dr. Jordan Peterson um, says that Jung's book Ion is the scariest book he ever read, or something like that. He said something like that when he was talking about Jung back in 2016 or so, and the reason is because Dr. Jung wasn't talking about the physical world. He was talking about the psyche. And that's what religions are doing, but even theologians don't know that. And so Dr. Edward Edinger, in his talk, um, clearly said it finally. He was interviewed in 1994 by Lawrence Jaffe, and he said, well, what's the biggest thing that Jung did in his lifetime? And Dr. Edinger said, well, he penetrated to the source of all religions. Okay. And Jung says it himself in Answer to Job. He says, every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche. It's not a statement of the phasis, the physical world. And so if you understand that and understand that the psyche is real, then we can accept what the fundamentalists say, that every word of the Bible is true. Yes, every word of the Bible is true. It's true as an expression of the human psyche. And the problem is the confusion comes up because they think it's physically true. Well, certain aspects of the Bible probably are pretty physically true. In other words, there were historic events which are described in the Bible that actually physically happened. And I accept that there were actually physical people named Jesus of Nazareth and Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. Those people actually existed, and they did their ministries or their teachings. Those are definitely true, and what they became in the divine realm is, they became in effect God-men, although the Buddha would deny that. But everything that's been said about Jesus, for example, is true for someone. Whether it happened in the physical world or not, it certainly happened in the psyche, in the psychic world. And if human beings by consensus accept that it happened, then it happened for more and more people. The same as Buddhist teachings happen for more and more people. People say, that sounds true. And so they begin to live their lives that way. And they begin to feel okay about themselves as human beings because they're following that path. Doesn't mean that any one path is better than any other path, though, or more true. They're all true. And so anyway, this is what Dr. Arzt is talking about, and also why Jung made this statement, I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children. So what he meant by that was, this is true for me, Carl Jung, and when he was writing down the Red Book, he was talking about his psychic experiences, but he didn't expect you to have the same psychic experiences, not at all. And so he's not trying to say that these rules are absolutely true for you. They are true. They were true for him. And when he says you are no longer little children, so now, after reflecting on his work for 150 years, almost, I mean, he's past his 145th birthday at this point, but after reflecting on his work, certainly for the last 100 years, we now know things about the psyche and how the psyche actually works, not by statistics. We know how the psyche communicates with us. The psyche communicates with our conscious mind through dreams and visions. That's how it does it. So every time you have a dream or a vision, that's a message from deep in your psyche that it thinks you need to know. And the psyche does not waste time. Okay, in other words, the psyche has a lot of stuff going on and that needs to happen that you do not need to be conscious of. So you do not need to be conscious of the process by which you breathe 12 times a minute. You do not have to be conscious of the process by which your heart beats 72 times a minute or whatever it is. You do not have to be conscious of the replication of all the cells in your body, with the possible exception of your skeleton, every 7 years, which happens. And the brain, I guess, also doesn't replicate. But every other part of your body does. You don't need to be conscious of any of that. But there are certain things in the environment that you do need to be conscious of. So, and those, some of those are autonomic. For example, most of us have had the experience of being in bed and waking up as though we're falling with a start. Well, that instinct comes from a time when our ancestors, our primate ancestors, were literally living in trees, and the babies had to have an instinct to wake up. If a baby was asleep, the baby had to wake up and catch itself, so it stayed in the tree and didn't fall down to get eaten by the tiger. And so that instinct, that waking up, being asleep, and then waking up with a start, that instinct comes from that time, and it's still within all of us. And there are many other examples, which is too broad to go into. but the point is, we know that that's where that came from. And we know lots of things about the psyche too. And so the point about a dream or vision is it's not your psyche wasting time. It's not taking out the garbage, as Freud put it. It's actually your psyche telling you something that it thinks you need to know, you need to be conscious of. And so it sends us messages in that form. Now, why is it in the form of dreams and visions? Because this process started millions of years before there was any writing. Okay. And so our psyche, we think in images all the time. And by image, I don't necessarily mean a picture, although it can be a picture. But if I say the name of a famous musical piece, like I'll give you an example in a moment, but if I say the name of a famous music piece, you will have an image. If you know the piece at all, you will have an image of what that symphony or what that song is about. And you'll have a lot of experience related to it. You might remember the people you saw singing it. You might remember the time that you played it wrongly on your guitar in your garage or something like that. But let's take some examples. So if I mention Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, okay, everybody just had bum, 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 bum play in their mind when I mention it. Okay, because we all have an image of the Fifth Symphony in our mind. If we know anything about it, we know that theme that appears in the Fifth Symphony. If I say Yellow Submarine, anybody from my generation will immediately think of the Beatles, where they went when the Beatles were famous, what stadium they were sitting in when they were hearing the Yellow Submarine song sung. They'll think about the fact that they had an album of Dr. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. All those things will come to mind immediately because we have images of those things. And
Sergeant Pepper.
Go ahead, Nick.
Sergeant Pepper. Dr. Pepper is a drink.
Oh yeah, Dr. Pepper, sure, a drink. We all I haven't thought of Dr. Pepper for years, but thank you for that, Nick, because that's a good example that even though I don't normally drink Dr. Pepper because it's not necessarily my flavor, but when you mention it, boom, that image comes up in my mind. I know how it tastes. I know how it feels. I know where I was when I was drinking it. And so many things come together in the moment when you say something. And so all of that activity of the brain developed long before anybody invented language, okay, of any kind. And so that's the way our brain evolved. And so the only way that our psyche has to communicate with us is through these images. And so when you say Dr. Pepper, okay, everybody's psyche immediately goes, boom, they think about Dr. Pepper, what it tastes like, what it feels like, where they were when they were drinking it, whether their mother liked it or not, all these things. And we store all those things and they come to us as an image and all at once, all in a rush. It doesn't come to us sequentially by reading a book. Well, if you read a book about what Dr. Pepper tasted like, you'd never get the idea, but you get the image of it instantly. And so that's the way our psyche communicates with us when it thinks we need something. And so in a conversation, if I say a word, I'll say another word here. All of us will have a different image of what this word is. And so the word is one of 12 Dutch words in the English language, which is the word yacht. Okay, well, everybody has a different view of what a yacht is, but yacht, literally, if you look only at the literal translation, it only means small boat, okay, but when I said that word, everybody gets an image of it, and it could be anything from a kayak or a rowboat, a small rowboat, up to, Aristotle Onassis's yacht on which Jackie Onassis is sitting after she's married Aristotle Onassis for her second husband, having been married to John F. Kennedy. And so all of those things are connected up in my psyche with the word yacht. And so my point is that our psyche, our deep unconscious, is doing things that we need constantly, every minute of every day, asleep or awake. Your psyche is at work taking care of your body. And when it presents to you images, it doesn't do it randomly. It doesn't do it to carry out the trash. It does it because it thinks you need to know about this, and it thinks you need it to know right now. So when you say the words Dr. Pepper, all of our psyches react to that and says, oh, my ego must have to know something about Dr. Pepper. So here's all the things I know about Dr. Pepper. Boom, let's take them all off the shelf and look at them all at once, all in a rush. And that's the way language works. And so that's the way our psyche works. And that's why this is important, because dreams and visions are exceptionally important in our lives. And the scientific method, so-called, or the rationalism, has dissed dream study and dream work for 100 years, and it's time that stopped. We have to understand the way the psyche works, and it was Dr. Jung that penetrated through to that and understood how religions work, understood how the psyche works, and so on. That's why we're talking about it. That's why I would go off a session that was last night at 1 o'clock in the morning, my time, and get up at 8 o'clock in the morning to do this session. Specifically for my friend Vivian, who can only see this session live. And so because of that, I need to do it at this hour to make it reasonable in time for people that live in that part of the world. Nick and Nicole could easily see the replay, but some people in the world can't see the replay on YouTube, and therefore I have to get up and do these things live. All right, so reading on. So Jung was at an epical turning point in history where we were in the process of understanding ourselves and our consciousness and our psyches in a different way, and he penetrated to the depths of that. So then Dr. Arzt goes on. In this sense, the Red Book serves as a document of Jung's discovery of his very personal myth, life as the unfolding of the individuation process that simultaneously represents an account of the conditions necessary for the development of much needed new collective myth. Okay, so the point is that right now we're living through a time which we call it epochal because it's the right time where, as Jung put it, all the signposts have fallen. Every all the laws and rules that were laid down by all the religions over many, many years we have to look at them in a different way. It's not that they're not true, they're hyper true, but we have to look at them from a modern perspective. And so Dr. Jung first had to understand what it was that he was about, and then he had to somehow describe that. And what he did was he wrote 20 volumes describing that. And it's just so immense what he's done. And Edinger pointed out that his psyche was so gigantic that it makes the rest of us seem like little people by comparison, because he had worked through all of these things, and specifically the unfolding of the individuation process. So let's talk about what that refers to. That refers to the fact that the unconscious is always trying to become more conscious. That's what it does. And that's what it does in every species, not only humans, not only human beings, but all species. So all species learn what they have to do to survive, and they don't do it consciously. But for example, the rabbit learned to run faster because if it didn't, it would be eaten by the eagle, and the eagle learned to see better, more clearly, have very, very acute vision, so it could see the rabbit and still catch it. And so over many, many generations, the rabbits that weren't fast got eaten, and the eagles that could see the clearest were the ones that did eat. And the slow rabbits were gone, and the myopic eagles also starved to death. And so over thousands or millions of generations, let's say, rabbits got faster and eagles got better eyesight. And that process happened in every facet of life, in every species. And so that's what's going on from an evolutionary point of view. But then there's the issue of individuality or individuation. So individuality might be wearing a plaid shirt. Okay, so that reflects my individuality, that I particularly like this shirt. And so that's why I picked it to wear today for this session. And so that's an example of my individuality. But individuation is learning to balance the forces of life at the highest possible level. And so I can speak of it metaphorically in the Tarot very clearly, because this also relates to the functions that Dr. Jung spoke of. So let's talk about those for a moment. There's sensing, which is all your senses, and it's your ego is your conscious mind, and so you can take in information by sight, by sound, by touch, by taste, uh, and and by feeling, by sensation. And so that's the sensing part of ourselves. And so great athletes, for example, are athletes who not only sense the way they must behave in order to be a winning part of a winning team, but they also get in the gym and do the necessary. And if they're very effective at that, then they win on the psychic scale. But then there's intuition. That's the opposite side of bringing things in, that is not brought in by the senses, but is by seeing a whole. Intuition would be something like seeing the whole world and grokking it, understanding what it means. And so my simple example that I give people when I talk about the Myers-Briggs type indicator is a sensing person gets all the details, okay? But an intuitive person, but the problem with a sensing person is they never think they have enough detail. So a sensing person, you can show them 1,000 trees, and if they're over the top as a sensing person, they'll want one more data point before they can confirm that yes, there's a forest there. Okay, but an intuitive person, you can show them 3 trees, and and they'll assume there's a forest there. They'll see the forest in their mind, and they won't need to have all the data points. And so that's a different way of being in the world in terms of function. But individuation would be also trying to get yourself up to the top of intuition as well, to understand, okay, if I'm getting these sense impressions, then it means this. Okay. And so, I can say right now I have 4 people listening to me on Zoom and 14 listening to me on YouTube. So those are data points. So there's 18 people listening to what I'm saying right now, and that's a data point. But the implication of that is that what I'm saying is meaningful to people. That's my intuition, that it's meaningful to people. It makes it worthwhile for me to get up at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning and give this discussion, this homily, and help you be aware of some of these ideas. So intuitively, I get all of that from these 2 data points, 4 people on Zoom and 14 on YouTube. What does that mean? My intuition, my insight tells me that it means it's important for me to give this class. And what I've been learning, very interestingly, over the last few weeks, is people are really interested in the tarot. Because as I've been building up this YouTube channel, which is now approaching 11,000 subscribers, I've obviously been watching how many people look at each given video that I produce, and there's about 1,100 of them now. And so when I see that Mary Stein has gotten over 7,200 hits in about a 3-week period, then I ask myself why. Okay, and intuitively, I have some data points which tell me it's because of BTS, the Korean boy band, and it's not only just a boy band. It's a group of 7 young men who've revolutionized education, if you can imagine that. They've turned it from, oh, it's drudgery, I have to go and I memorize this out of the book, and so on. And what they've done is they've turned that on its head so that whereas before people would think, oh, who wants to study Jung? Oh man, that's so complicated. It's difficult to understand and so on. So, you know, not gonna waste my time on that. Where's the television? Let me just turn on the television and put my mind in blotto. But what these young men have done is now created 2 albums that address what Jung taught specifically. And because of their popularity and what they're doing to get people's attention, all of a sudden people are trying to learn. Okay, so instead of, oh, let's see, let me get into graduate school and then maybe I'll start reading Jung type thing. Now we have 13-year-olds who are interested in BTS, who are buying Murray Stein's book that he wrote 25 years ago and trying to learn. I want to learn. I want to know this. I want to understand why it is that, or what it is that he was teaching. And so they've turned education on its head. And so that's what the 7,200 hits on Mary Stein's talk is all about, because they've turned education on its head. And so that's an intuitive meaning. And so the idea of individuation is not only to get all the sensing data, but once you've got that data, you know, what the hell does it mean? Who cares what the sensing data is? What does it mean for my life? And for that you need insight, and for that you need intuition. And so individuation is not only becoming the great athlete that can make the touchdown on Sunday, and you know, and being able to feed yourself and reproduce, survive until you reproduce. Okay, that's all in the sensing part of the world. But individuation is also about, you know, what was all this about? Why, for the last 3.5 billion years, has life been developing? What does it mean? Where is it going? Are there others around the universe that where the same thing is happening? Why is the unconscious trying to become conscious? That's the fundamental point that an individuation is about. Why are we becoming more aware? Why do we want to become more aware? Why are we driven to become more aware? And so that's the magic of BTS, is that they've just turned education on its head, and now we don't have to cram stuff into people's heads. They want to learn because their psyche tells them, I want to know about this. I want to be aware of this. And there's a wonderful TED Talk on YouTube. I'm sorry I don't have the link to it, and I'll have to go back and find this TED Talk. But this Indian man had taken a laptop and he put it in an alcove in Chennai, where anybody could come up to it and they could use it at any time of the day or night. And he just left it out there and he wanted to see what would happen. And when he came back 2 months later and he's checking out the laptop, making sure it's still working properly and so on, and he had a 8-year-old kid come up next to him and he says, we need a faster modem. And that's the point. Here's this 8-year-old who wants a faster modem so he can learn more, so he can become more aware of things. And, you know, and I've seen the same phenomenon occur in Pakistan. And so, you know, our education system is being turned on its head right now by coronavirus, where we're being forced not to use the schools anymore. And we're realizing that we can teach people lots of stuff over the internet. And oh, by the way, they're going to go look at things that interest them, whatever it is, whether it's Nick studying music, or You know, Nicole studying art, all of us are learning things because we have all the information in the world at our fingertips, and except for government and company secrets, but other than those things, we can get to any information in the world. So we're all learning, we're all turning ourselves into awareness machines. I mean, we're becoming more and more efficient at awareness, and this is why all the cultures in the world are in extremis right now, because every culture has a pot of things that you need to believe and understand, and all of a sudden all those pots have holes in them and they're leaking. And so when they're leaking, we need to understand what it is and what we need to do to appreciate that. And so it's no longer what do we need to do as an American or as a Singaporean or as an Australian. It's what do we as a human species need to do to save this leaky lifeboat that we're all in, called planet Earth, because there's no alternative. There's not going to be another ship coming to save us. And so even if the human species does get off the planet over the next 10,000 years and actually create another human culture on another body in space, that may be possible. But for most of us, that's not going to happen. It's going to happen for an elite few. And so what about the rest of us? We're all in this lifeboat, and if we don't find ways to collaborate together, then we're going to sink. And so that's kind of one meaning of what's going on right now. We have to find the meaning of what's going on. And one of those things is we can't be stuck on the old ways. We can't be stuck on, my religion is wrong and therefore or right, and therefore I'm going to kill you because you don't believe in my religion. That's not what it's all about at all anymore. We have to turn back toward one another and say, what can I learn from that religion that my religion didn't get, and then work toward that. So that's a long homily. Let me just look at the YouTube chat here for a moment. And so Daniel M says Jesus is a symbol. Yes, Jesus is a symbol. So Miles says, a doctor of microbiology said that he would rather be asked to land a Boeing 747 without having had any training than to have to manage what the liver takes care of for us. That's how complex we are. And, he's absolutely right. I mean, you could easily talk a person through landing a heavy jet. I'm sorry, because I'm trying to read. Now, here's the problem with getting old, and that is that our sensing organs don't necessarily work as well as they once did. And so I'm at a point in my life where I'm seeing double. And therefore, I have to shut off one eye so that I can read. Both of my eyes work perfectly well and are corrected to 20/20, but they work differently now. And so if I want to read something, I have to put on my eye patch. So anyway, so the point being is, an air traffic controller could easily talk the one surviving person on a 747 down and get him to land successfully. But the liver does such complex things for us that without the liver, we will die, very simply. And I know that personally because my brother had 3 liver transplants because his liver function couldn't be replaced except by another liver. And ultimately he died in 1988. And so that's absolutely true from my personal experience. And he says, we're apparently something like 100 trillion cells of different types doing stuff. Yep, absolutely. I saw an eagle fly down from a tree and grab a mouse out of tall grass on a Friday evening. Yep, they'll do that. The wild kingdom, 13-year-old boys buying books on Jung, marvelous. Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel M. Men should use as much resources as they do on space explorations, on exploring the psyche. We're truly extroverted as a species. Okay, so yes, we're truly extroverted. We're interacting with one another outside, but what's going on inside? What's going on inside all of you as you're listening here? There has to be a reason why there are 18 of us on this call right now. So something is going on in all of us that calls us to be in this session right now. And so that's what needs to be explored. And so anyway, but I was trying to address the individuation process. So in my opinion, and I've changed my opinion within the last 6 months, before I was thinking that the objective was to get to the top of one of the 4 tarot types or suits. So if we think of sensing as the coins, wands as creativity, thinking as the swords, and feeling as the cups of the tarot, I was thinking that, okay, if my friend Tim Holmes, who's a world famous artist, is wonderfully intuitive and he can do great art, then that's his objective. And to a degree that's a little bit true, but that would not be a fully, that would be, if that's all he did, if only all he did was produce art and did nothing else, then he could not be considered to be individuated in Jung's sense. That would be a unique individual, a quite famous and successful individual. But what Dr. Jung was talking about was having wholeness, which is a balance of all these functions. So if we go to the swords, which is thinking, that's discernment. We all need discernment. We need to be able to tell who's trying to help us, who's a friend or foe. I mean, very typical thing that jet pilots have to learn is identify friend or foe, IFF. And that's partially done electronically through instrumentation, but it's fundamental to all life. We have to identify who's a friend and who's a foe, and who we can rely on to be in our environment, and who's trying to kill us or what's trying to kill us. And so we have to be able to discern that, to differentiate friend and foe. That's a very simple example. And so people that are terrific thinkers, who are philosophers, or who are great medical people, they may not be able to understand, to intuit the meaning of what they were doing. For example, this year there's a new movie out called Radiation, and it's about the life of Marie Curie, who is one of the only people to win 2 Nobel Prizes, one in physics and one in chemistry. And she identified 2 new elements, one of which is radium, and I don't remember clearly what the other one was, but anyway, she was a terrific scientist. And in her lifetime, in the movie, it shows it as she has this little vial that has radium in it that glows in the dark, and she's holding it in her hand when she's in bed. Well, because she had refined basically coal into radium. And so it was a terrific achievement. And she's holding this glowing vial in her hand while she's sleeping. And, that's a metaphor for she was exposed to a lot of radiation in her lifetime. And she ultimately died of cancer. And that's because her terrific discernment didn't get the meaning, didn't intuitively understand what the meaning of identifying a new element is. And if you separate out your element and get it more and more refined, maybe it'll give you cancer. And maybe if you refine an element enough, such as uranium-235, it can become an atom bomb. And so that's the meaning of her discovery. That's the negative meaning of her discovery. But if she'd been a more intuitive person, as opposed to one who was very skilled in chemistry and physics, she might have understood that, and she might have figured out ways to ameliorate the destructive characteristics of what she was doing. So I can highly recommend this movie called Radiation. It's only released in 2020. So everybody should go see that movie. And we saw it on demand on our television set. So anyway, Marie Curie would be an example of somebody who's reached the pinnacle of the thinking category, but wasn't fully individuated in these other functions. And so the 4th function is feeling, and many men are poor in that area. And we have to look at, for example, at the President of the United States. The President of the United States is the king of coins, okay? He has achieved every material thing he could possibly ever want, and nobody can think of another material thing that he should achieve to be at the top of the suit of coins, of the sensing part of life. But oh, by the way, he's just miserable on the feeling side, not only vis-a-vis other people, but also for himself, because I don't think there's anybody that can convince me that this is a happy man. And of course, the issue with materialism is it offers the idea that, wow, if the idea that was being sold in the 70s and 80s was he who dies with the most toys wins. Well, that's not right, because you can have all the toys, as our president does, and still not be happy. And that's not winning. Most of you have probably seen my metaphor for this, but I'm going to show it to you once more because others have not. And that is this. This boat is a 64-foot motor yacht. And the significance of this boat is that its name is Never Enough. And so the problem with materialism is you can get more and more and more, but you're never going to have enough. And meanwhile, why were you doing that? Well, you were doing that because you thought that if you got a bigger and bigger boat, you'd be happy. But in point of fact, this boat is just a dead piece of fiberglass. There's no human being in it. And so whatever it meant while the owner was getting enough money so that he could purchase the 64-foot motor yacht, didn't make him happy. And it was so true that he named his boat Never Enough, which is the point. And so whatever it is in the material world that you might be striving for, whether it's a better car or a home for your family or whatever it is, that physical object is not going to make you happy. Something else is going to make you happy. And so you need to examine that part of your life because you might not be balanced there. And so, but an example would be Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa disavowed having valuable things in her life, but there's almost no doubt that she was an extremely happy woman because she was called to do what she was doing, and she did it throughout her life, and nobody can deny that. And so she is sort of the perfect example of happiness, of a person who's living out what they're called to do in their lifetime. And so the point about individuation and the unfolding of the individuation process, which comes from the unconscious, is the unconscious trying to become conscious. And we run into roadblocks in life, but when we do, and there are traumas, but when we do, that's our opportunity to see what we're called to do next. This is the eternal moment. It's always the eternal moment. And it's from this eternal moment that we must select from the best of the possibilities. So if learning about Carl Jung is the best possibility that you can have in your life, then that's the best possibility. But it doesn't mean that 5 minutes from now or 12 hours from now, that will be important to you at that time, in that eternal moment. But what we need to be doing is discerning what it is we need to make us happy, what we're called to do, what we were specifically made to do based on our circumstances in life, and figure out what that is, what we're called to do, and then do it. And so here I am giving this 2-hour talk where I can't see any of you, and I am basically talking to a camera. It's like the Jew who was asked what it was like to pray at the Wailing Wall for 40 years, and he said, "Well, it's been like talking to a wall." Yeah, but it's not about that, right? It's about what it is in you that you're called to do, and that person who went to the Wailing Wall for 40 years to pray was not addressing the physical world. He was addressing the internal world. And so feeling is about what's going on inside you, among other things, and whether that's plus or minus. And so individuation, I've come to believe now, and mind you, I'm only getting this when I'm 74 years old. So I'm saving you decades of your life to help you understand this point, that it's not about reaching the pinnacle of sensing where you can be a terrific athlete, or you can be the president of the United States with his own airplane and his own trophy wife and so on, or something like that. It's not about reaching the pinnacle of that. It's about reaching the pinnacle of all four. And that is a fully individuated, whole human being. And this is why I'm spending the next year going through the Tarot in very great detail as a map for life, because the ideas that are contained in the Tarot are ideas that we all must internalize and understand in order to have a happy life. And so it's so fundamental to Jungian psychology, and yet is it irrational? Certainly all divination is irrational, but nonetheless it works. And it works because of synchronicity, the acausal connecting principle. And we are synchronous beings. In other words, when we see a synchronicity out there, it means something. It means to our unconscious that something is going on, and we need to reflect on what that means to us. And at first it may be completely quizzical, I'll give you an example because it's a shocking example. I recently had a tarot reading by Melissa Townsend, who has a video on this channel with me, and it was a profound reading. And the outcome card of that reading was the devil. And I have been working with the tarot for 25 years, so I know that the devil isn't necessarily a bad card, but I have to admit that getting that card as my outcome card did rock me a bit. Okay, and so I say, okay, why am I getting this outcome card? And so that was in a context that I won't, I can't, it was disjointed. It was getting the devil card as my outcome card in a tarot reading. Okay, so I have to reflect on that, and I have to understand about it. And so what happened the following week is I got this book. Okay, let's see if I can get it at a, all right, never mind. I'm gonna remove my my secret decoder ring for a moment so that I can show this to you. Okay, so this is the book I got, Tarot and the Archetypal Journey, the Jungian Path from Darkness to Light by Sally Nichols. Now, this book was written 40 years ago. Ms. Nichols died about the time it was first published. It's been republished in 2009, I guess. And because I knew that the tarot was a key to getting into these unconscious depths, I had bought a number of books, and this was one of them. And so on page 13, believe it or not, page 13 of the foreword of this book, and by the way, in the tarot, the devil card is card number 13, and so this is on page 13 of the foreword. And Ms. Nichols says the following. The only card he, meaning Carl Jung, talked about in particular was the devil. Okay, and this is the quote. Now in the Tarot, there is a hermaphroditic figure called the Diablo. That would be in alchemy, the gold. In other words, such an attempt as the union of opposites appears to the Christian mentality as devilish, something evil which is not allowed, something belonging to black magic. So in Christianity, they deny the existence of the devil. Christians deny the existence of the devil and insist that God is all good. But in fact, as Job learned in the book of Job, God has a terrible side. And that terrible side of God can cause great hardship, as it did Job. And so the way Job worked his way out of it was he was always appealing, like a court appeal, let's say, to the good side of God, not to the evil side. And this is the significance of Dr. Jung's book, Answer to Job. And if you haven't read Answer to Job, it is a profound book, and I urge you to get yourself a copy and read it. It will shake your day in the same sense as getting the devil as the outcome card shakes your day. But one of the other writers that I'm reading now, points out that the purpose of the devil is to push you off center, so that, you can reflect and get to something better. And so if you think about it, everything in our life where we grow typically comes out of trauma or something that went wrong or something that pushed us off center. And we have to learn how to center ourselves, to come back to a unity within our own psyche. And if we do that, then we're going to live a very satisfied life, and we can, when we get to the point of our death, we can be sure that we have accomplished our purpose. So individuation then is the getting as high as you can on the four suits in the Tarot. Think of it that way, or getting as close to the pinnacle of all four functions as you can. If you're only going to get to the pinnacle in one function, you're going to be out of balance, and so you're not going to be fully individuated. You might be an individual, as the people that I've described, the football player or the president of the United States, or Marie Curie, or Mother Teresa, or anyone. The Pope is presumably a very intuitive person, as an example. They may have achieved the top of one of the functions, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have a happy life. And so that's what this was about. Okay, so going back to this now, I've managed to get through about 10 lines of this essay, so you can see what a challenge it is. All right, so let me read that sentence again. The Red Book serves as a document of Jung's discovery of his very personal myth. In other words, what it takes to reach wholeness for himself. Life as the unfolding of the individuation process that simultaneously represents an account of the conditions necessary for the development of a much needed new collected myth. So the question is, what is the myth that we can all hitch our wagons to. And I would say that the myth we better hook our wagons to is that we're all living on one leaky lifeboat, and we better make sure that we keep patching it up, because if we don't, there's no alternative. We're going to go in the sea. But differently, in the form of a thesis here, Jung's personal individuation process could resemble Lyotard's petit récit, whereas the new myth of the collected individuation process has the potential to be Lyotard's grand récit, or a grand narrative. Okay, so I'm not familiar with Lyotard's work, but you know, all of us have little calls that relate to different parts of our being, but there is a grand narrative that is going to be the myth of the human species that we're all going to have to hitch our wagons to, and that is the grand narrative of saving our leaky lifeboat. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to read one more thing here for this week, and that will mean I've gotten through one page. So here's what Dr. Jung wrote in a late letter to Sir Herbert Reed, dated 2 September 1960. Jung writes, quote, "The great problem of our time is that we don't understand what is happening to the world. We are confronted with the darkness of our soul, the unconscious. It sends up its dark and unrecognizable urges. It hollows out and hacks up the spaces, the shapes of our culture and its historic dominance. We have no dominance anymore. They are in the future. Our values are shifting everything. Our values are shifting. Everything loses its certainty. Even sanctissima casualitas, that translates to something like sacred causality, has descended from the throne of the axioma and has become a mere field of probability. Who is the awe-inspiring guest who knocks at our door pretentiously? Fear precedes him, showing that ultimate values already flow towards him. Our hitherto believed values decay accordingly, and our only certainty is that the new world will be something different from what we were used to." And so that paragraph requires a certain amount of unpacking as well. Dominance would be dominance like government or religion or belief systems, something like that. All of those have proven not to be the meaning that we as a human species need in the grand scale. And so, you know, I don't think that there's anybody that could say that their religion and their belief will save the world. I mean, there are people who do believe that. There are people who send their children to school and say that, you know, God will protect them from the coronavirus. Well, God might protect them from the coronavirus because they're young, but when they come home from school and they have the coronavirus, they might give it to you and you might die from it. And so, you know, God may protect them from the coronavirus, but will he protect you from your children when they come home from school? That's the question. Okay, but so what is the overarching myth? Okay, so the overarching myth might be something like this. we as human beings represent the only reflective consciousness in the universe. Okay, it's probably not true. Lots of scientists think that there are actually tens of thousands of civilizations, maybe not like ours, but that potentially exist not only in the Milky Way, but in the universe. But for the moment, we don't know of any other. So for the moment, let's just make an assumption that we're the only one. And if we're the only one, then the only consciousness that exists in the universe is on this planet. And if this planet dies or sinks, in my leaky lifeboat metaphor, then God will have no consciousness in the universe. And so the point that applies to everyone is, how can we make it so that consciousness, our consciousness, human consciousness, can continue to exist in the universe? And it seems to me that that is an objective that everyone in the world can adhere to, and therefore that can be our new myth. Our new myth is we all live on the same leaky lifeboat. There's nobody going to come and rescue us. There's not an ocean liner going by nearby that can come and pick us up. And therefore, if we're going to save ourselves, we have to figure out how to live together on this leaky lifeboat so that we can keep it patched up until such time as we can find another species in the universe that's also on a leaky lifeboat. Even if there's 10,000 civilizations like ours in the Milky Way, which might be a possibility, they're all going to be on leaky lifeboats. That's the truth of it. And so then what? Who knows? But I was listening to a universe program last night where they were talking about something that's 60 million light years away. If they could see us through a telescope, they would be seeing the Earth at about the time of the great extinction of the dinosaurs. They wouldn't be seeing us because light travels at an absolute speed of light. And if they're 60 million light years away from us, that means the light that left the Earth 60 million years ago is now just arriving at their telescopes. And so they're seeing the Earth as it existed 60 million years ago. And that's the same with us the other way around. So what we're seeing in the Andromeda galaxy, for example, which I think is, I think it's 2.5 million light years away or something like that. What we're seeing is what was happening at that time, not right now. And so it's only if you get in the same region of space that things are going at the same time and speed. So it seems to me that that's a good myth for us. Now, let me go back. Daniel says, man should use as much resource. Okay, we talked about that. And then Salem says, will you ever do a video about synchronicity? Well, I have done a few videos on synchronicity, Salem. So, so what I would say is that if you go onto this YouTube channel, onto the homepage, and then put in the search engine the word synchronicity, I think a few of my videos and the videos of others will come up. Synchronicity is very simply an acausal connecting principle. And so if I apply it to the tarot, what I would say is that I can go into a room with 1,000 people in it, and I could throw the cards across the stage and just do a reading off the stage without any particular layout. And everyone in the room would think I had read for them. That's synchronicity. What's significant about that is I have no idea what those readings meant to those people or what they were. I can read the cards, but I can't causally create the synchronicity. The synchronicity is something that is between my reading and your psyche. And so because I'm quite intuitive, I can look at the cards and I can tell a story, but I can't tell you what that story means in you because I have no idea who you are, where you are, or anything about you. So I wouldn't possibly know anything in a causal way about you. But if I do a reading for 30 minutes, what I do know is that in that 30 minutes, because of the archetypal nature of the tarot cards, I will say something that will connect up something in your psyche. And, very likely in this 2-hour period that I've been speaking now, I have connected things up in your psyche that make a difference to you. And I have no idea what those might be. But everyone in that room of 1,000 people, everyone has little hurts, little sore spots in their unconscious that they're not consciously aware of, but are there and need reflection. And so the reason Melissa Townsend's reading for me was so provocative was that, okay, I have some sore spots in my psyche, like, maybe I'm not the best tarot reader in the world, and maybe I don't know what all these cards mean particularly. And so that's a sore spot. And, maybe I don't really know what the devil means. And obviously, Dr. Jung has pointed out that in alchemy, the devil would represent producing the gold, because we have to have trauma and heartbreak and all kinds of things in our lives in order to cause us to individuate and to reach the psychic gold. That's what alchemy was really about. It wasn't about making gold in the physical world. It was, although that was a byproduct, and that's what some of the alchemists maybe thought actually back in the day when they were doing their alchemy. I mean, they did invent the science of chemistry. And so maybe they did think that they were making gold in the physical world. But in point of fact, they were actually doing depth psychology, and doing depth psychology means fully individuating. And if you're fully individuated, then you've got the psychological gold. Then you've got the winning ticket for a lifetime. It's not the guy who dies with the most toys wins. No, that isn't happiness. That's not gold. The gold is having achieved the pinnacle of all 4 of the tarot suits. And knowing that you've done that, if you knew that you'd done that, and you knew you'd done the best you could do based on your personal call in your lifetime, if you knew those things, that would be gold. Okay, that's why Dr. Jung could die so peacefully, because he knew quite well, and for years and years, he knew that he had done everything that he could possibly do. And so if you know that you've done everything you can possibly do with the assets that you have available to you, then you're going to die peacefully and be happy. But if you haven't achieved that, I mean, the world is full of stories of athletic figures, sports figures who have reached the pinnacle of their life at age 30. And then their physical health starts to fail them and they can't continue. And so then what? Okay, then what? Let's say you're 30 years old and you've got 5 Super Bowl rings and everything is hunky-dory. Then what? What are you going to do for the rest of your life? Are you going to sit in front of a television set and just become a couch potato? I mean, that's not wholeness there. And so in terms of synchronicity, it's an acausal connecting principle, which means that I can walk into a room with 1,000 people and I know with great confidence that I can connect to you. I can connect to every single one of those people. But I know nothing about how I could do that causally. Okay, I don't know what I'm going to say in my reading, and I don't know what I would have to say to reach you and your deep unconscious. But I know through synchronicity that if I do a reading and you listen to it, I am going to connect with you somehow. Okay, because let's say I was to do a Celtic cross, in which I put down 10 cards. I know out of those 10, 7 of them may have no meaning to you whatsoever, but I know that 3 of them will touch some sore spot in your psyche. And so, for example, Melissa Townsend read the devil as my outcome card. And wow, that's a sore spot because, I didn't know everything about the tarot cards. And so that's a synchronicity that Melissa didn't know before she started to read, and I didn't know, and it was unexpected when I was listening, but nonetheless, she connected with me in a sore spot. So I'm saying, oh God, I guess I better learn something about the devil card. And so that was a synchronicity right there, that moment when I was having that reading. But then a week later, I'm reading this book, and lo and behold, what Sally Nichols says on page 13, which matches up to the number of the devil card. So that's a synchronicity. On page 13 of the foreword, which is a book that she wrote 40 years ago, she presents the one card that Dr. Jung said anything about. And that's a synchronicity too. And she put that in her book, in the foreword to her book 40 years ago, but it connected with me 4 weeks ago when I had that reading. And so, Sally Nichols didn't know me 40 years ago when she wrote this book. I didn't know her. I didn't know anything about the tarot at that time. I've been studying it for 25 years. There's no way I didn't even know her name until maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And yet all of those things converge to have huge meaning to me personally. That's what synchronicity is about. I hope, I don't know if I've answered your question, but you can study synchronicity for a long time, and I hope that's helpful to you. Anyway, so Miles says, Salem, it would be interesting to talk about great synchronicities in history. I wonder if anyone has written a book on this. Yes, I think there are many books about this, Miles. And if you read about any famous person's life, you'll hear about something unexpected that happened to them that changed their whole life. Karam says, you're doing well. Good to see you. Does Taoism have any connection to Jungian psychology? Well, most certainly it does, because Taoism talks about the opposites and the yin-yang principle. And I can just share with you quickly here. This is a Taoist symbol, the yin-yang symbol. And as you see, there's not just one duality, there are many, and they're nested. And so that's what this particular version of the yin-yang symbol refers to. But even though everything in the psyche is duality and therefore creates tension, which is the source of our psychic energy, it is all within wholeness. So the yin-yang symbol is a mandala that represents a unity, and all of those dualities are within us and are within the unity of our planet, our universe, our solar system, etc. And so all of those things are unities and mandalas that include within them our self. I hope that's helpful. Hello, Whammy. Whammy. Welcome. Okay, so my voice is giving up, and I have to run another session in 3 hours' time, or 2.5 hours' time. So I think I have to call it quits for today. So we're closing in on the end of this essay. It ends on page 39, and I am on page 31 after having done 9 sessions on this essay. I will be back here again next Sunday at 8 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time to continue this discussion of Dr. Thomas Arst's essay in Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. There are 4 volumes of this, so you won't go bored reading it. And Vivian, thank you for being here. I'm glad you could make it today. I hope it's been helpful. And let's see. And so I will continue again next week. We have a very important session with Becca Tarnas this afternoon on the participatory imagination, which is what the Red Book represents. And that begins at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time today. I hope you can join us. Let's see if I can give you the link to that. With any luck, I could. I'll give you the link and the password so that you can join us this afternoon. if you are available. Let's see. All right, so if you're free, please join us in this session at 1 p.m. today. And Becca Tarnas here, here's the link that can get you to the session. So if you will follow this link, and that will get you into the panel on Becca Tarnas' session, which I've had constant registrations for the last 3 days. So I think there are going to be a lot of people involved, and I hope you can join us. So with that, I'm going to call it quits for a couple of hours, and I'll see you at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Thanks for joining us.